Number 10. This is a story that I've rarely told anyone, because it was legitimately the closest thing to a supernatural occurrence I've ever personally experienced, and it scares the shit out of me. I have a little brother. He's 3 years younger than me. When I was in 6th grade, we were home alone during the summer time and playing around as brothers do. Wrestling around, chasing each other around the house, etc. Nothing out of the ordinary. I ended up chasing him into our parents' room, and we were throwing stuff back and forth at each other. Having a little fake war across the bed at each other. I don't know, kid stuff. It popped into my head that it'd be funny to scare him by shutting off the lights. There were no windows in our parents' room, so with the lights off, it's pitch black, except for whatever light creeps in from under the door. I retreat to the door and decide at the last second that it'd be funnier to leave the room, turning the light out as I passed, and close the door behind me, leaving him in the darkness alone. Maybe scare him a bit. So I did. I shut the door behind me as I turned the lights off and left the room, turning around to listen to him as he panicked and wanted me to come back in, but he didn't.
What are you doing?
I heard him say. Yes, he thinks I'm still in there, I guess. Haha. He didn't see me leave the room. I keep listening.
Jacob, what are you doing? You're freaking me out. Please stop.
That's odd. I wonder what he's talking about. I keep listening.
Jacob, I'm not joking. Get away from me and turn the light back on now, or I'm telling Mum that you scared me.
What the fuck? Get away from me, did he just say? Get away from me? Laughing, I yelled through the door to him. Haha, dude, I'm not even in there. He screams loudly, like he's been stabbed or something. I mean a blood-curdling scream. I freak the fuck out and try to open the door. It's locked. I didn't lock the fucking door. Why is it locked? My little brother is still screaming, begging me to help him.
Hurry, please!
I'm panicking. I have no idea what to do. I'm like 13 years old and weigh 90 pounds. I can't bust this door down, and my little brother is in trouble. I have to get to him. He stops screaming. I try the door handle again, and to my surprise, it opens effortlessly. It's unlocked. I open the door and turn on the light. I see my brother in the corner crying. After some consoling and apologising, I finally get to him and explain what happened. He tells me that when I turned the light out, his eyes hadn't adjusted to the light yet, and it was just dark. After about 20 to 30 seconds, his eyes start to adjust, and from the little bit of light leaking in from under the door, he saw me standing in the corner with my back to him. When he asked what I was doing, I turned to him and started walking slowly across the room towards him. I kept coming until I was standing over him, looking down at him. He said he couldn't make out any features, just a dark figure with a shadowy face. He saw a hand extend out towards him and grab his shoulder. It was cold and very strong. It hurt him. When I opened the door and turned on the light, the figure was gone. I never saw anything myself. My brother is now 23 years old and I'm 26, and to this day he won't talk about this event. We have friends who've heard the story through me and will tease him about it. He simply leaves the room, refusing to acknowledge it. He's admitted to me that even almost 15 years later, he is bothered by what happened that day. He still has nightmares from time to time, and he still doesn't have any explanations for what happened. Number 9. Memories are tricky little buggers. My memories of 1st grade and earlier are in bits and pieces, scattered and reordered in primary coloured fragments of time. So it comes as no surprise that I convinced myself as I grew up that the sinister things I remember were all in my head. Reoccurring nightmares are only just that, right? I have my share and always have, As far back as I can remember, it wasn't until I had pushed them so far out of my mind that they would come back to me blazing with such startled truth I could no longer dismiss, no longer ignore the vivid colour in which the paranormal has touched my life. They came to me in little shadow figures, none any larger than 6 inches in height. They were two-dimensional and featureless creatures who resembled little men in pointed hats with pointed shoes. When they finally spoke, I was never able to make out what they said. Their voices were high-pitched and tiny. At first, they were only in my window at night and were silent. Gradually they progressed, getting closer to my bed as I lie awake at night. I was never touched by them, but I would watch them swing on my solar system mobile as I lay frozen in fear. I am not sure how old I was at the time, but I only lived in that house until 2nd grade. I had learned from previous experiences not to run to my mother's room, and she would only yell at me for over-imagining things. The little shadow men were not menacing, but not understanding what they were or what they wanted unnerved me, and I began pulling the covers over my head, willing them to disappear. They would not visit me every night, and as time went on and I grew up enough to convince myself they weren't real, I stopped seeing them at all. Approximately 20 years later, I was a single mother of 2 young children. My youngest child, my daughter, was in preschool at the time. She was born with heart problems, so I always checked on her several times throughout the night. During a midnight check-in, I expected to find her sleeping. Instead, I found her sitting up in bed, giggling and staring out the window. "What you doing, princess?" I asked.
I'm watching the little men, Mummy.
She said sleepily.
They're so funny in their little hats dancing in my windowsill.
She then described them for me, and my blood ran cold. I had never told anyone about the little shadow people. I had even revisited all my old books, scouring for them for any type of inspiration for what I had convinced myself were nightmares, and found none. Yet my little girl was seeing exactly what I had seen so many years before. I told her the same thing my mother told me so many years before, but without the outright dismissal that I knew would only push her away from me. "It's only a dream, love," I told her softly. "But when you see these little funny things, come and get me, okay?" She continues to tell me about everything. She shares everything about all of her little imaginary friends. Some are just that. Some I believe to be more than that. Others I have met before. Meanwhile, I took to the internet, paranormal message boards and the like. Someone somewhere must know what is happening to my family. I foolishly thought for months I was obsessed. All I found from all my trouble were warnings that shadows are almost always malevolent. I say that my search was foolish because most of those who seemed to want to help only gave grim ideas about demons following me and my children. Number 8. Ever since I started working in an international school here in my country, I've been seeing things that I should not see. I am really afraid of the dark and being alone, so being able to see those things creeped me out. But after a few times it just became a usual occurrence in my life. This story happened in mid-February 2014. In my school we usually have 2 to 5 students per class. My classroom that day was quite spacious for us, and on my left were the door and narrow window. That time I only had 2 naughty students. They keep on annoying each other, so while I'm writing on the whiteboard, I'm staring at their reflections too. At first, I was staring straightly at them, and then suddenly something caught my eye. Outside the window, a boy around 6 to 8 years old passed. I only saw his head, but wasn't able to see his facial features properly. I stared at him because I thought that he is a son of one of my co-faculty. Suddenly, he disappeared before reaching the door. I immediately excused myself from the class and went out to check if I'm just imagining that the boy disappeared. I looked around the corridor, but there's no one in sight. Then it hit me that there's only one class in the area except mine. I went to the other classroom to ask if they saw a boy running around and check if there's someone around that height. When I arrived there, they said that no one has come since the bell rang, and that all the people in the class are the tallest guys in our school. I shrugged it off and went back to my class. After that, I went to my second class. My second classroom is located on the 3rd floor of the main building, which is used as the girls' dormitory. It is the only room there that is used as a classroom. So, we're alone in the whole floor. Whoever comes to the 3rd floor can feel a very heavy and suffocating feeling. They don't turn on the lights in that area, and there are minimal windows, which makes it scarier. There is a dorm room that usually attracts my attention. I don't know why, but every time I pass there, I feel like someone is sitting on the bed and asking for my attention. Anyway, my classroom is the complete opposite of the corridor. My classroom is very spacious and bright due to the number of windows there. I have 6 students there. Upon entering the classroom, I decided to forget about what had happened in my other class. After finishing my lesson, we had a very fun conversation. Suddenly, they became quiet, and that's when I heard a small child singing. It sounded like a girl. I asked my students if they had heard it. Everyone said they did not. Again, curiosity got the best of me, so I went out to check. But all I saw was the darkness of the hallway. I also checked outside the windows, but there's really no one. After that day, I promised to myself that I would try my best not to go to that classroom again. Even up to this time, I still see kids running around in other classrooms, or I find myself staring to a certain spot even if there's nothing in it.
Number 7.
Just my word, so it's all down to you if you believe me. But I promise you, this isn't made up or something out of a dream. This is real, and these things or creatures do exist. It all started just before my nan died. Me and my mum moved in with her to give her a hand as she was really ill. I must have been around 9 at the time. There was only one room with a king-size bed, so me and my mum shared it. One night, I don't know what woke me, but it was early hours. I just sat up in bed, and there was a glass pane at the top of the door frame that shone out to the hallway. My nan always left the hallway light on. Well, this one night, while I was sat there, I looked through the glass and saw this shadow walk past the window, then stop and look behind it as another shadow walked towards it. At that point, I woke my mum and we both sat there and watched these 2 shadows walk past from one side of the glass to the other. They must have been about 7 feet tall. Well, after this, we woke my nan and all of us searched the bungalow, but it was empty. After this event, my nan died and we moved out. To this day, I think something followed me. Loads of things used to happen, from footsteps coming up the stairs to doors opening and closing. I think the scariest events had to be this voice that used to always call my name. To start with, it was a little girl's voice. My mum used to tell me to ignore it. I think she thought I was going nuts. One time when I was about 13, I was on my own when it started calling me louder and louder, and then it turned from a little girl voice to a little girl's voice to this horrible, malicious voice shouting it. Then the back door flew open and a handprint appeared on the glass pane. The other scary event was when I woke up in the middle of the night to a strange being at the bottom of my bed. Yes, I know what you're thinking, but believe me when I say it, it was there. Me and my friend were top and tailing, and it was right next to her. It must have been about 8 feet tall, cloaked in a pitch black cloak, with this thick black smoke rising from the bottom of it. It saw me looking and disappeared right in front of my eyes. Well, after that we moved. Few more things happened, but that's just a completely new story.
Number 6.
My mum has warned me against using the Ouija board due to her own experiences. She used one at a friend's house when she was young, Nothing of consequence happened during the use of the board, yet she noted that whatever ghost they were chatting with seemed to be violent and seemed to have it in for her. She shrugged it off and left in her car. On the way home, she hit and gruesomely killed a horse which appeared out of nowhere, running at her car in the middle of a city in the afternoon. Surely that can't be a coincidence. 5 days at a haunted lake. When we get there, which is about 5 hours from Toronto, we were pretty delighted that it was so secluded. The nearest cottage was about a 45-minute walk away. The cottage itself was about 30 years old and had been restored and updated with some nice amenities like heated floors and room-to-room sound system. Despite the updates, the owners kept with mostly original furniture, so the place had this quaint, antique look, which I suppose serves the mood of the cottage well. There were 2 bedrooms, one master and one smaller room, with 2 beds, presumably for children, a large common open space and a wood-burning stove, and a nice wrap around the deck, with a large barbecue rounded out the cottage features. Next to the cottage was a smaller version of the cottage, like a 1/5 size miniature, built as a playhouse for children. It was really cute and the attention to detail was remarkable. However, age and weather had given it a worn look, and it had not been repainted for quite a while. If you looked at it for too long, it was actually kind of creepy. It was like the little runt child of the parent cottage. Also on the grounds was a wood shed where you get your firewood. A sign encouraged guests to chop enough wood for the inconvenience of the next guest, with a good sized wood axe impaled on the chopping block ready to go. About a 5-minute walk down a trail through the woods leads you to the lakefront, where there was a jetty outfitted with a canoe, paddle boat and another barbecue. So that was basically the setting, and the first night was pretty normal. It was the second night that things started to get strange for me. Day 2. A strange, rainy day. It rained hard. We happily spent the day indoors. Although Rabbit was rather looking forward to traipsing around the woods. Around dinner time, I realised I had stupidly forgotten to shut off the gas valve on the barbecue, and it had drained overnight. Recalling the second barbecue down at the jetty, I took Rabbit with me on the short hike down the path. By now the rain had stopped. It was already dusk, and once you hit the path under the cover of trees, things were outright dark. I regretted not bringing a flashlight. Rabbit was off leash, of course, and as a scouter, he would typically run ahead and come back and joyfully run ahead again. This time, he wasn't. He kept right next to me the whole time, which is unusual for him. By the time I got to the jetty, fused with the barbecue to unlatch the propane tank and prepared to head back, it had already gotten quite dark, and I was starting to dread walking back up the path again. With a full propane tank, it was going to be hard to jog uphill in the dark, so I steeled myself for a steady walk, being thankful to have Rabbit next to me. The whole hike up the path, I heard only the steady crunch of my feet, and Rabbit's patter next to me. Everything was quiet. Then I remember hearing a rather loud rustling off in the trees. It was a bit nerve-wracking, but it was nature, and any manner of creature could be making its way through the bush. I tried to ignore it, and eventually emerged back at the cottage. My wife Bethany was standing on the deck.
Oh, there you are.
She sounded a little surprised.
That took long.
Yeah, I had to fuss to get this thing out of the cabinet.
I thought I heard you coming back a few minutes ago, but I've been waiting for at least 10 minutes, and you just showed up now.
I thought she might have heard the same creature I had, though the timing didn't quite add up. I was tired and just wanted to start dinner, so I shrugged it off and we ate and called it a night. Day 3. When things get outright frightening. It was decent enough weather to do some boating and fishing for most of the day. Rabbit got to swim in the lake, and we had a huge lunch and just sat and drank wine till the sun set. That night while we were asleep, Rabbit started to whine and pace around. It was about 2 a.m. and I was pretty groggy from all the drinking. Beth was out like a light. I figured Rabbit probably needed to go outside to do his duty, so I pulled some pants on and grabbed his leash and headed outside. It was cool and a fog had crawled in from the lake. I couldn't see more than 10 feet in front of me. The porch light was meek and ineffectual, but it was enough to light the immediate patch of grass at the bottom of the stairs, where I was standing with Rabbit, encouraging him to do his business sooner rather than later. Well, he was taking his time, sniffing the ground and not really committing to it. I was getting a little antsy and was telling him to hurry up. My agitation was likely not helping him. That's when I heard the crunch, crunch, shuffle, crunch, crunch, shuffle sounds coming from the woods, somewhere out beyond the fog. His tail was between his legs, and he shrank behind me. This is not usual behaviour for him. I stood there for a while at the bottom of the stairs on a patch of grass, and listened for the crunching of leaves and shuffling noises again. It was coming from the side of the house where the miniature play cottage was. I directed the flashlight there, but the beam didn't get too far. I took a couple of steps to see if I could make out anything. The crunch shuffle came again. Then I heard panting, the heavy laboured breathing of a tired animal. But was it an animal? I couldn't really decide if it was. Other than a dog, I didn't really know what other panting animals might sound like. Then I heard the sound of the small door to the playhouse creak open and slam shut loudly. It rattled the glass and scared the crap out of me. I ran back up the porch with Rabbit leading the way. We hurried inside and I closed and locked the door. I was absolutely terrified, and I tried to inject some sense into the situation. We're in the middle of the woods. It's the middle of the night. Humans are here, which means food might be lying around nearby. Of course we're going to attract nocturnal creatures. Raccoons have been known to claw open doors and trash cans. I was acting absurd. Rabbit still hadn't peed, but was now curled up on a couch. His eyes wouldn't leave the door. I headed back to the bedroom to find my wife awake, standing at the window. "Hun, what are you doing up?" I asked. She didn't respond. I touched her shoulder. She turned around. Her eyes were open, but she had this look on her that was a mixture of worry and confusion. "What is it?" I said again. She was scaring the crap out of me.
I saw it.
She said. "Oh? What is it, a raccoon?" Figured. "No," she said breathlessly. And the way she said it, it was like a pleading no. It sent a chill through me and my heart started racing. I did not want to hear what she saw. I just knew I didn't. After a moment, I asked her as calmly as I could, "What was it?" "Something was crawling around down there," she said. I nodded. Pause. It was a child. There was a child crawling through the bushes, a little girl, on her hands and knees, like some animal. I didn't even know how to respond. The image of what she was describing sent my head spinning. I was blinking rapidly. I remember this, and it was giving me a headache. Beth didn't say anything more. After a minute, she sat down on the bed, still confused, as if she wasn't fully comprehending what she saw, or what she told me she saw. I watched her. She lay down after a few minutes and fell asleep. I couldn't sleep bloody wink for the rest of the night. I just lay there listening to every single sound inside and outside the house. Cracking twigs, creaking noises, tap tap tapping, scratches on the roof. But I did not hear the crunch crunch shuffle for the rest of the night. Day 4. I visit the miniature playhouse. I must have dozed off some time before dawn because I woke up to bright sunlight. Rabbit was standing on the bed looking down at me with this kind of pleading look. He was hungry and he probably really needed to pee. Beth was still half asleep, but was rousing, stretching and rubbing her eyes. I took Rabbit outside where he was relieved, and I studied the playhouse. Even in the sunlight it gave me the creeps. I heard Beth inside, up and about, and then running water in the bathroom. I headed over to the playhouse. Rabbit followed me. It really was a near exact replica of the main cottage, right down to the little details like the flower boxes, shutters, the placement of the chimney. It was about 5 inches high. It was about 5 foot high. There were 2 little steps that lead up to the miniature door that closely resembled its larger version. A hand-painted sign over the door read, Playhouse. Oddly, there was at one time a padlock on the door. The latch had now broken off. Next to the door was a large window which had long dusted over. I peered in, but I could only see odd shapes lying about. I opened the door. It smelled of paint and mould. The resemblance to the cottage, of course, was superficial only. Inside was just a single room. There were old paint cans stacked in a corner, paint rollers, pieces of old carpet rolled up and leaned in another corner. A broken small rocking chair lay on its side. A stack of floor tiles, some random piece of wood lay scattered. Apparently it had been relegated to storage some time ago. Cardboard had been taped up over the windows on the opposite wall. Crayon markings decorated the walls, and there were remnants of toys and colouring books amidst the clutter. When I looked immediately down, I saw wet markings where the dust had been disturbed. Something had obviously moved through here. I followed the trail. It moved around the room, maybe twice or more, and then disappeared, or perhaps went back to the door. I couldn't really tell for sure. I didn't see any kind of animal footprint or anything I recognised, just a weird mess of swishy lines through the dust. Something had definitely been in here. I looked back at the walls again and noticed the drawings of small hands, the way a child would put their hand up and trace around the fingers with a crayon. All the drawings were of the right hand. I don't know why I noted that. I realised Rabbit was back up on the porch, lying next to the door. I backed out of the playhouse and closed the door. It rattled the glass, just as I had heard it last night. Over breakfast, I asked Beth how she slept. She said she slept okay, but had a disturbing dream. I asked her to describe it to me. Bashfully, she said she only remembered being frightened by something out in the woods, and that it went back to an old childhood fear of being chased. She was trying to joke about it, and to pass it off as nothing much. I didn't press her for details. I didn't tell her that she looked wide awake when she told me she saw a little girl crawling around on her hands and knees in the forest in the middle of the night. I just didn't want to bring it up. The rest of the day was decent. We went into town to pick up some food and sundries, and spent most of the day relaxing on the deck in the sun. The next day, several bizarre things happened that was enough for us to pack up and leave early. Day 5. Things get way too real. We took the canoe and spent most of the day out on the lake. We left Rabbit at the cottage for the day, promising him a full day of swimming tomorrow to ease our guilt. It was a bright and cheerful day, and it was easy to forget the events from a couple of nights ago. In fact, it started to feel downright silly. After paddling around our part of the lake for most of the day, stopping to fish, snack and drink, we decided to paddle across to the far side of the lake where the other cottage was located. We could see the dock that must belong to the cottage, but not much else. So we started paddling in no real hurry. After about 15 minutes, we meandered over. The dock was empty, except for some debris and a wrecked rowboat. We were surprised to find that the cottage here had actually long since collapsed. A green roof lay a few feet above the ground, and there were old wood boards everywhere. Cinder blocks lay amidst the overgrowth, and there was nothing else. There was a hole in the roof, and it looked like some enterprising animal had made a den within. Beth suggested we go check it out. I felt strongly that we shouldn't. I said that it didn't look safe, and that it was already turning to evening. Secretly, I really wanted to head back before dusk. It didn't quite happen that way. Beth wanted to paddle around more at the very least, so we killed another hour before leisurely meandered back to our part of the lake. By now, the sun had set behind the tree line, and mist had started to creep over the surface of the lake, reflecting grey and sombre light over everything. It went from bright and cheery to dreary and depressing in a matter of minutes. Things got cool quickly, and it was a bit tougher paddling against the wind, which had picked up substantially. "Oh shit," I said. I'll never forget that moment when I looked over to our deck where we were headed, to see the figure of a man standing there. Beth saw him too. We instinctively stopped rowing. "Now who the fuck is he?" I said, annoyed and terrified. A really strange combination of feelings. The man was far enough that we could make out only the vaguest details, but beyond arms, legs and what appeared to be a raincoat, it was hard to discern much more. He was thin and he stood still. Beth waved an arm, but he didn't wave back. "Maybe it's the owner, come to check on us. See how his guests were doing," Beth suggested. I wasn't too sure about that. Why come and check on the 5th day? Why not a phone call? I wasn't buying it. It was getting quite dark. "Well, is it rude to just be sitting here?"
I think he's waiting for us,
she said. I didn't care. I'd rather sit out on the lake as the mist crept around us than to paddle over to our dock where this man was standing there. So we just sat there for a while.
"Okay, now I'm scared as shit,"
Beth said. The man hadn't moved at all. I felt a little comforted that I wasn't the only one behaving irrationally. Before we knew it, the mist had encroached over everything, and both the man and the dock faded from view. All we could see was grey. I slowly put my paddle into the water and gently nudged us forward. I just wanted to get close enough where the mist parted so we could see the dock again. Then I planned to stop and just watch. After a dozen gentle strokes, the tip of the dock reappeared from the mist. I let us coast for a while until the whole thing was in view. The man was gone. I heard Beth gasp. Enough was enough. I paddled on, really annoyed for some reason. We got to the dock. I helped my wife out and we pulled the boat up and left it there. We said, "Hello?" a few times, but heard nothing. Beth was clinging to my arm, and fright and cold was making her shake. Now I wanted to get back to the house and be indoors as quickly as possible, and that meant a brief march up the path through the woods, in the dark and in the fog, but it had to get done. We hadn't planned on being out here till dusk, so I didn't bring a light. The trail was easy enough to follow, but we just couldn't see beyond 10 feet. We walked awkwardly and stiffly as Beth clung to me, trying to not step on each other's feet and wishing that Rabbit was with us. As always, once we got under the trees, it became oppressively dark, still and quiet. We were both breathing heavily, as the way was uphill, and we were both cold and spooked out of our minds. I tried to keep focus, remembering that it was only 5 minutes walk and that's it. And then we heard it. Crunch, crunch, shuffle. Beth pinched my arm, and we both ran for it. Crunch, crunch, shuffle, pant, pant. In the distance we could hear Rabbit barking. Rabbit never barked. For his 4 years alive he might have barked twice by accident, but he was barking loud, almost angry or fearful. I heard the crunch, crunch, shuffle somewhere behind, far enough but still distinct. We were at the end of the path. We scurried across the grass up the stairs and opened the door and threw ourselves inside. We were wet, sweaty, panting and scared stupid. Then we laughed for a bit. Then I remembered that Rabbit had been cooped up all day, and he at least needed to go out and do his business. I gave it a few minutes to catch my breath. Things were quiet again, and I took him back out while Beth stood on the porch and looked around. Rabbit peed. and then suddenly started barking into the mist. Did I see a man move through the mist? It was impossible to tell. I had enough of being outside for the day, so in we went. I kept by the window looking out for any signs of movement. Okay, this is the scariest shit ever. I finally admitted to Beth. She agreed. We tried to have a laugh over it. We were both, genuinely, pretty spooked. By now it had gotten really windy, so much that sometimes the gusts shook the whole house. During the day, Rabbit, home alone, must have knocked over the main lamp in the common room, so it lay busted on the floor. I remembered that there was a lamp in the spare bedroom, so I headed down the hallway. The spare bedroom door was closed. Funny, I don't remember closing it. I assumed Beth did. Now it started to feel creepy inside the house. I opened the door and looked in. There were no light switches, so I tried to make out the layout of the room in the dimness. There were two small beds on the opposite walls. In between them was a small table upon which was the lamp I was after. I crossed the room towards the lamp, walking between the two small beds. I saw that the covers had been disturbed on both beds, and there was a dent in one of the pillows. I assumed Rabbit had been in here, maybe napping during the day, but the door had been closed. This started to not feel right. I grabbed the lamp and realised I would have to unplug it first before I could get it out. The plug was behind the right side bed's headboard. I bent down, getting on my hands and knees, and peered under the bed, and there she was, the little girl, white-faced, peering back at me. I swear I saw this, but when I jerked my head back, I whacked it against the edge of the beam and my eyes flashed. Of course there was no one under there. My stupid imagination had projected the image into the real world. I grabbed the cord and yanked it from the plug, snatched the lamp and marched out of the room. I walked down the hallway and heard the door gently close itself behind me. I was holding the lamp in one hand and I had bunched the cord up in the other hand, so there was no way I had closed that door on my way out. Rabbit was waiting for me at the end of the hallway. I decided against telling my wife this. We had enough of a freaky evening, and she was just loosening up with some wine now. She had the wood-burning stove going, and I could have been fooled into thinking everything was warm and cosy and fine. But I was a nervous wreck. I wanted to get out now, call it quits, pick our stuff up and leave. I don't think Rabbit would have minded either, but we didn't. Not yet. In the middle of the night, when we had split almost a whole bottle between us, I woke to sounds coming from the end of the hallway again. The wind had died down. There was the occasional gust, but it was otherwise pretty quiet outside. I waited and heard it again. Tap, 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 scratch. Tapping on the window in the other room. Then the rustle of something shifting on the bed, possibly blankets being pushed around. I looked up. Rabbit was at the foot of the bed. His head was looking in the same direction. His ears were up, and he was stock still. Tap tap, rustle rustle, creak. Still from inside the house. Rabbit started to growl. That deep, low internal growl that he does when he's not happy about something. Tap tap tap. Then slam. That came from outside. The playhouse door followed by the familiar rattle of windows. Beth was now awake. When I looked over, all I saw were her eyes wide and bright and staring at me. She was almost on the verge of tears, and I tried to say, "Shh, it's fine," but she cut me off. She told me in a whisper she remembers what she dreamed of the other day. I nodded. Was it the little girl? She looked panicked now. Tap, tap, tap. From the end of the hallway, the door creaked open, paused, then closed shut. Rabbit had stopped growling, but he hadn't moved. He was staring intently at our bedroom door, which I had closed. There was a sound of something moving through the house, softly, very carefully, moving. I could have convinced myself I was imagining it, if it hadn't been for Rabbit. I watched Rabbit turn his head as he tracked the sound moving from the back of the house to the front. where our bedroom was. Then his head turned as he tracked it back the other way. By now I couldn't hear much, just the odd creak and rustle, but Rabbit was very aware of something. We lay there for a long time, maybe an hour, then we heard it, and this time it was close. It was right outside the bedroom window. Crunch, crunch, shuffle, shuffle, pant, pant.
It's her.
Beth said. I really, really wished she didn't say that. There was a flash of light next to the bed. I thought about going to the window and playing the light around outside. I imagined seeing a little girl crawling around through the leaves on her hands and knees under the moonlight. I decided not to do this. We lay there with Rabbit at our feet, listening to the shuffling and crunching of something crawling around outside the house. This must have went on for a few minutes, but it felt like hours. Neither of us moved, and it had gotten really cold. Or we had scared ourselves silly that we were feeling cold. Either way, it was the most uncomfortable, most terrifying situation I could ever remember. We decided not to stay another night, and as soon as the first crack of sunlight appeared through the window, we got out of bed, packed our stuff, and within an hour we were in the car. On the ride home, we didn't talk much, and when we did, we talked about what we experienced. I had asked Beth if she ever closed that spare bedroom door. She doesn't remember that she did. I had asked her if she ever went in there. She confessed to me that since day one, she didn't feel right going down the hall to the spare room. The first day, she had been looking for some blankets, and when she headed down there to check if there were any, she was struck by a strange feeling that made her stop. She said she felt weird going in there, as if she were intruding. She knew we were guests in someone else's house, so the feeling of being in an unfamiliar home was always present no matter what. But still, she said she had this irrational desire not to want to go in there. I didn't blame her. I told her I felt strange while I was in there getting a lamp, and that I might have let my imagination get the better of me. As I recalled the dream she said she had about the little girl crawling around under the trees.